Hello, my name is Jalen Pachenik. Welcome to Apocalypse Stream's latest stream of Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain. I am joined, of course, by our CEO and founder, Dennis Dyack.
Hi, everyone.
And I am also joined by a fan from our Discord. Say hello, Golden Zan.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
So we're still playing through Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain. We're not joined by Ian today, our associate producer. Unfortunately, I will be taking the role of him, and you'll have to watch me struggle through this game. In my off time, we had to start a new save for this week, and I've done my best to get back to where Ian was. We have a couple extra items, less of Hearts of Darkness, I think, which we'll see how that goes. But we're just getting into, this is...
Forador's Mansion.
Forador's Mansion is his name.
Forador. Forador. Correct.
Okay, where I wanted to change.
All right, everyone. I would like to, first of all, thank Apocalypse Studios for inviting me here, and also congratulate you all on having the guts to make such a revolutionary game that has gonna be.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks,
Right.
Thanks for the kind words, and thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
All right, so the first question, without further ado, comes from Very Keldon on Discord, and the question is, what's the story behind Coffee Guy in the Blood Omen credits?
Coffee Guy. Oh, that's a pretty fun story. So, ironic too. There's some ties. So, our first office outside of a house was in the strip mall. Ironically, the place we just moved into, same landlord, great guy. And as we have now in our new office, so we used to be in this office that was fairly long, and you would have to yell down the hall when someone would come to the front door. And what we had back then, this was back in 1996, so there wasn't the number of, I would say, number of chain restaurants as there are today, so there wasn't as many places to eat. And there was this independent guy that would come by in a coffee truck with like muffins and food, and every day at 10:30 he'd come by the office and give everyone coffee. We didn't have a coffee machine back then. And have muffins and stuff. So whenever he'd come by, Kevin Gordon, who was at Silicon Knights for a super long time, one of the first hires in the company, he would be up front and he'd yell to the whole office, "Coffee Guy!" And then everyone would get up and run outside to get coffee and donuts from this guy. And so this went on for many years, through the entire development of Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. And so when we finished the game, I was like, Kevin, we've got to really, literally get your voice in here. And so Kevin just yelled it on a microphone, and then we put it in the credits at the end because it was one of the main things that stuck out in the development. We put a lot of hours into the game. Everyone worked really hard. And that was like a staple at the old company. So that's the story there.
Interesting story. All right, so can we fire up the next one? Next one's coming from me. The question was, how will player characters be individually referenced in the game's lore? That is to say, how will characters weirdly named interact with or harm the immersion of the game for everyone else?
So, is the question you're asking, just to make sure I understand the context, are you asking whether players will have, say, a name like Kain, or will they have their own names, and how will that affect the lore?
Yes, I'm basically asking if a player has a weird name that doesn't make much sense for the lore of the world. How will that work in that house scenario?
Right, like Pikachu 1, 2, 3, 4, or something like that.
Precisely.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, understood. That's a good question. And one of the things we're debating is actually how we're going to handle that issue. We do want gamers to have an impact on the lore and the story, and at the same time, we may do one of two things. You may have your online name, and then you may have your what's the right word? Dead House Sonata name, where you're referred to, which I guess given to you, or maybe you can select from a bunch of ones that are appropriate for the race of the undead. Like, given there are certain ways phonetically to create undead names for everybody, and we may do it that way as well. I think if we have a Pikachu 343, or whatever names people choose, which they might want to have as their online handle, we can certainly do something that's contextually and content-wise that makes sense for the lore as well. So when we roll out the exact details of how we're going to do that, we'll let everyone know. That will likely be tied into the true name system as well. So there's a lot of detail to roll out in this regard.
All right, I see. The true names is a concept that I'm looking forward to hearing more about when you guys are ready to share. All right, so the next question comes from the Evolved 144 on Discord, and the question is, I'm gonna read it exactly as he wrote it. In Dead House Sonata, will you guys be focusing on realistic geography when it comes to the graphics and visuals?
Yeah, I guess if you want to see the look of what we're going for and what we're targeting, I think a realistic epic, very dark epic, bigger than life thing. So the current fly-throughs that we've been working on with the town, the medieval town tile set that we just dropped with Lamentations, will give you a good idea of what the look is going to be. Now, there's going to be some epic architecture, some bigger than life monuments that are visually eye-popping that we haven't introduced yet. This was sort of the first thing that we've done, and things will get a lot better. It's likely that we'll improve these tile sets quite a bit before the game gets released. But yeah, so I would say realistic. If I actually was speaking with the Evolved One, or chatting with the Evolved One earlier, and I guess it's close to The Witcher, I guess, for graphics, but definitely a realistic look. But it depends. It depends on. It's all in the eye of the beholder. But we're not going to go for a stylized look at all, and moving very quickly away from what we look like in the prototype, and all the animations that we still haven't seen. All the animations are being replaced, and really looking forward to seeing everyone's reactions to the new assets as we drop them in. So we're moving towards a realistic look, is I guess how I would describe it.
All right, nice. Well, I imagine that the magic nature of the whole Dead House universe allows for some kinds of unrealistic but interesting visuals, interesting geographies.
Yeah, I guess we're gonna definitely have some Lovecraftian elements in there for sure. And Lovecraft was, impossibly large, very strange geometric shapes. So we'll be doing some things like that in general, and when we start to introduce different houses, there'll be some crazy stuff as well. But by and large, the look that you're seeing now is what we're targeting. Now it's going to improve a lot, but I think that gives a good indication of the direction we're going now. So just watch the latest Lamentations, and you'll see some various weather effects and visual graphic looks for the game. That's the direction. If you want to see what we're going to look like, that's an indication of where we're going.
Awesome, perfect. All right, so the next question is one of my own, and the question is specific to Dennis. And what is your favorite undead concept in Dead House Sonata?
That's a tough one.
That is a tough one.
It's like picking your favorite child.
It is exactly like that. You're taking the words right out of my mouth, actually. Well, it depends on what. So I'm gonna sort of cheat the question and give under different categories. So for most interesting and provocative character, I'm gonna say the ghoul. because the ghoul, you literally are what you eat. I think gamers are going to have a lot of fun with that class. I know, thinking about the design and how we're going to do it, that's very interesting. I think the white, from a pure design perspective, very, very interesting. I think I've never seen any kind of design like that in any RPG to date, because it mixes so many different things. I don't want to give it away. We're going to roll that out. It's pretty cool. I also think the iconography, or how iconic the vampire is. I love the vampire ghost from Legacy of Kain. And then finally, the Revenant, I also really love, because it's from a character and narrative perspective, it's that character. In some of the stories you're going to write, there's a character purely driven by hatred, which is kind of like Kain turned to 11 out of 10. So there's some interesting things that way too. So that's how I describe. I love them all. The Wraith, I also really like the concept where we're going with the Wraith, and I also like the Banshee. So I guess I'm saying every character at this point. So pretty much.
It only makes sense.
Hopefully
I'm very
the
curious
answer
to
works
hear more
for
about
you.
the white as well.
It was kind of a cheat, but
That's alright, I like the answer. Alright, so the next question comes from Twitch. It's from Nightfall Alicorn. And his question is, what was the inspiration for the blood font found in the second crypt near to Kain's? I imagine he meant the blood fountain.
yeah, the blood fountain. It was especially the blood fountains. There was sort of an Egyptian. Really, the research back into sort of vampires, where you have some of the lore goes all the way back to Egypt in the Book of the Dead, with the.
Dennis, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Alicorn just corrected himself. He said he meant blood script.
Oh, the blood script.
Yes.
Oh, that's a totally different answer. Okay, we're talking about totally different things. Okay. The blood script is Futhark, Elder Futhark. And Elder Futhark is... that was one of my homages to Ultima Online. And anyone who's played Ultima Online, but Elder Futhark is just the old English alphabet that goes back, that dates back to the days of the Vikings and Old England, and the Elder Futhark is found all throughout Europe. And though people, if you look at the original map of Nosgoth, it's all written in Elder Futhark, so the blood script literally is just that. And one of the reasons that I put that stuff in there is when we're creating Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, everyone told us that because we were a Western company coming out of North America, and we're trying to make an RPG on a console, that it couldn't be done. They were only made in Japan. Everyone kept telling us all these things are impossible. And that was my little homage, because I think one of the first big RPGs that really influenced me was Ultima Online, and I think a lot of the Japanese RPGs after that really borrowed a lot from the Ultima series. And this is before Ultima Online, so this is like really old stuff. Ultima 3 really got me playing video games and got me to want to make them. So that's where that comes from. So Bloodscript is not my own creation. It is Elder Futhark, which you can go to any font, like Duff Font or Font Squirrel, look for Elder Futhark, and you'll be able to download the script and put it in Photoshop or any word processor, and boom, there you go.
Perfect. All right, so the next question comes from Iron himself on Twitch, and the question is for Jalen. He's asking, what is your favorite undead concept?
My favorite undead concept. That's interesting. My favorite would probably be the Revenant so far, from what I've seen and what I know that we're working with. The potential for stories and lore behind the Revenant I think is one of the more fascinating parts. It's an undead being built off of just rage and vengeance. And it opens up a lot of opportunities for how did that person become undead? Is that somehow tied into their vengeance, or are they just mad? Maybe they're angry because they are an undead now and they hated the undead in their living life. I think that opens up a lot of narrative opportunities that could have some really good payoffs. Hope that answers.
Okay. Sure, I believe it does. It was a good answer. All right, I have another question, which is, will there be wildlife in the Dead House universe? And if so, how can we interact with them? For instance, would a leech be able to use them as vessels?
That's a good question. One that we have not contemplated at this time. I would not see why we wouldn't have them, but that would be completely a bonus. So having deer and other foxes and small rodents or rabbits are running around would be really cool. I know for the cat adoption, we're going to have pets like cats running around, and some people have already requested dogs. We got some cool stuff coming up for the cat drive once again, in case people are wondering. So we'll be doing some stuff like that in the future too. But yeah, undecided at this point. Certainly if there's time. And the great thing with they might not be in at first, but I'm sure that's something we can put in later. Would they be used as vessels? I think almost anything for a lich, say, anything can be used as a vessel. It's just how good are they? It would be a very small battery compared to, I think, say, something else living in a major being. So, but yeah, I don't see why that would be, we would restrict that.
All right, that makes sense. I was wondering whether there will be small animals that you'd find in the cities, like rats, that the ghouls would eat if they are, let's say, close to dying and they need to recover health. I was wondering stuff like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
Certainly, I think even with vampires, there's a lot of even vampire lore where, push comes to shove, and you got to eat, so you'll do something. You'll eat something that's not high on the, I guess, nutritional value table, but yeah, I certainly that's possible. I think a ghoul will look for more fun things to eat, but push comes to shove, it is what it is. You gotta live. Ghouls gotta live.
All right. Okay, so next question comes from Twitch and it's from Raven Scara. His question is, having played Alphas before, I know that optimization can be a toss-up. So what do you see for the what do you foresee for the optimization state to be in the alpha stage of Dead House?
That's a good question. So certainly we're going to want it to run on as many systems as we can. Optimizing in it's just you're dealing with the spectrum on the PC side anyway. You're dealing with the spectrum of hardware that you want to try to accommodate for. So we'll go for a denominator that we think is most reasonable, that's not too low, so the engine looks gimped. But then at the same time, once we hit consoles, that's the great thing about consoles, right? You have a very set standard for graphics. You know what you're dealing with. And so actually from that perspective, optimization is actually quite easier. You just always sort of set a target. And from my standpoint, I've always preferred 60 frames per second over 30, and frame rate over pixels is something I've always been a big believer in. And you can see that in Eternal Darkness. Eternal Darkness always ran at 60 frames per second on the GameCube. We couldn't quite achieve that for 2 Human on the 360. That's simply because the processor made it really tough. But I think certainly on the new Xboxes and the new PlayStations, I'd rather keep the resolution down and keep the frame rate up. So that's the direction that we'll try to go. All focused towards playability. So if you're looking for optimization, frames per second first, then graphic fidelity later. I think we're hitting a pretty reasonable rate of fidelity right now when it comes to the look of the game. So we're going to want to make sure that that's always running at 60 frames per second on a reasonable PC and certainly on all the consoles.
Okay, knowing a lot of people that don't have access to high-end hardware, I'm happy with this answer. Okay, so the next question is my own. I was gonna ask about the mechanism in which you mentioned that we can set up a time for the quests, for the missions that we take. The way I've written it was, what's the maximum limit to how long a player can set their mission to be? And can a quest take up to a month or longer? And if so, how does the player benefit from doing so, from selecting uh, a very long timer for his mission?
Well, the way there was a couple of reasons we were setting this up, and the idea is it's both a combination of raid and quests. So because we are going to have some procedural, like there's going to be clear, there's going to be a combination of procedurally generated things as well as some, directed storyline quests. And one of the things that I find, so say you're playing something like World of Warcraft or another MMO, getting together and going on an epic raid can often take a super long time. So we want to give tools to gamers where they can say, I want to play with my 6 friends. Here is a campaign that we're going to create, and it will structure it for you to go through either a certain quest line that could be an epic quest resulting in great loot by the time you're done for all 6 players. So it basically, we want to take away the work of having to organize something where players can save their progress as they go, come in and come out, so they don't have to do the epic raid all in one night, where they could perhaps play it over a period of weeks or months. And the exact time and how long those are going to be are to be determined. I guess we'll wait and see. They're going to be as short as 15 minutes to. I guess no, that would probably be an hour or two for something on a raid level to something that could go several weeks or maybe even a month. I don't know. Well, we have to test it. We have to see what gamers want. It's kind of undiscovered country in that regard. So we'll be looking for a lot of feedback from gamers once we implement these systems.
All right, interesting. Yeah, it's a new concept. But what will be the benefit of selecting or creating a mission that takes, for instance, an hour? The longer the mission takes, the more resources the players will acquire, something like that?
No, you get better rewards.
Okay.
So the bigger, it's like everything, right? They take longer, so it's a risk reward. If you commit to something that's super long and you complete it, you'll get a bigger reward than doing something that would say be like 20 minutes. You go in and do a quick dungeon versus an entire epic campaign where you go to like 5 cities and 30 dungeons, and when you complete it all with an overarching storyline, what you get at the end of that is significantly better than completing a single dungeon.
Of course, it makes sense. All right. So the next question comes from Mornblade on Discord, and his question is, will there be environmental executions in Dead House Sonata?
The poor wretch was warped beyond recognition.
Environmental executions mean like throwing someone on a stake and killing them?
Yes, such as having... he's probably asking about a feature that was in Soul River. For instance, you could pick up a dying vampire and throw it on the spikes on the walls to execute him.
Yeah,
and there'll probably be something like that.
I guess we can discuss it. There's nothing planned right now. However, using the environment and the weather and the time of day and all the things that we're doing, we definitely want to do that. I guess we would have to look into the physics system. I think things like that were fun. I just don't know if they scale well for gameplay. So right now they're not contemplated. We can certainly explore it, but it's not on the immediate queue for things that we want to do.
All right. Okay, the next question comes from Bloodswords88 on Twitch, and his question is, did Silicon Knights ever have a Nintendo DS game in mind or in the works back in the day?
Have a Nintendo DS game?
Yes, if you had a schedule or you intended to create a Nintendo DS game.
I'm trying to think. I believe at one point, for Metal Gear, we were doing some connectivity stuff, but that later, we later decided to pull that. But I don't think we have any exclusive DS games ever planned at Silicon Knights. Not that I can remember. It's hard to recall. There certainly might have been some internal concepts, but I don't think anything ever went into development.
All right. Thank you for the answer. And the next question is my own. Will the mobile versions be exactly the same as PC? Will crossplay be coming to Dead House Nana?
Okay, so mobile, it's almost impossible to make mobile the same as a PC or basically a console because the hardware is so different. Now, crossplay between consoles and PCs, yeah, absolutely, 100%. And they're pretty much the consoles are PC these days. There's not really a whole lot of difference as far as power, except with a console you have different sort of online interfaces and standards. And, so we do plan on having cross-play for that. If it makes sense to do cross-play with our implementation of mobile, we'll certainly do that too. The games may not make sense from that regard, though. So we'll have to wait and see for cross-play on the mobile side. But certainly cross-play for consoles and PCs, yes, absolutely.
A new Xbox is almost as big as a PC.
Yeah.
That they're making.
Yeah.
They're really getting close.
Yep. Oh, they were close last gen too. So, yeah, absolutely.
All right. I imagine you have perhaps planned a companion app for Dead House on mobile versions, on mobile devices.
Yeah, there's one of the things we're going to be doing is there's going to be a lot of things outside the actual game besides something like that. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff like that planned. We really want to change the way people think about video games with Dead House, particularly with narrative. And you're going to start to see some rollouts with that. Particularly, did it crash?
No, I'm pretty sure there's a monologue or something that's going on right now.
Oh,
It won't
okay.
let me pause while that.
So I'm doing a talk at GDC with going into deep social media integration, and we're going to show how people watching on Twitch can have an effect on the game even though they're not playing it. So all of these different ways to affect the game outside of the game is something we really want to explore. I think that's one of the new and exciting mediums with today's games. And with regard to apps and things that you're talking about, we're going to really try to have that as much as possible. And not gimmicky. Gimmicky is always nasty. This is truly fun ways to interact with the game that are different and will allow you to have an impact by not necessarily playing, which I think can be a lot of fun.
Okay, perfect. The Twitch integration is an aspect that you mentioned before that I've been curious to see. I'll be looking forward to GDC on that.
Cool.
Okay, so the next question is from Science Stargazer on Discord, and he says, will there be a house of angels and a holy house with seraphim instead of vampires?
Well, that's sort of the same question, right? Because seraphim are... Oh, wait a sec. Did he say seraphim with vampires?
Instead of vampires.
Oh, so there is a house of angels, Divini House, and we will explore the entire hierarchy of angels with that house. So seraphim, all of them. So there's all kinds of things that we can do. As we roll out the different houses, the idea of the houses is they're going to be very asymmetrical, and it's really going to change the game up quite a bit. And the House of Angels will be much different than the House of the Dead, and they're both immortal in different ways, of course. But so people who are really interested in angel lore, I think we'll get a kick out of it. I'm super excited about that particular house. I've been I've always had an inkling to research angels. Actually, even when we were working on Legacy of Kain, I remember talking to Seth Karras about angels, and I think when he was working on Shifter that later became Soul Reaver, we were talking about angels while we were working together on Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. And I just went over all the reference material that I had and what I knew about angels, the heart of angels, and all of the different aspects about them that I think are pretty cool. You know, between the Watchers and the Seraphim, all those kind of things. So, anyway, yeah, love angels, and there will be a House of Angels.
Okay, awesome. I would like to expand a little bit on that. Do you have a pre-planned sequence to the development of any other house, or is it still up to definition?
There is definitely a plan of how we're going to roll things out, and an overarching, what's the way to call it? Like a grand story that expands across the ages. There's a huge story deals with different rollouts of all the houses, introduction of the houses, what each house has their own designs, and then above that there's even a higher macro level of storyline with the Elder Gods and what's happening in Nagosawa and why all these things are happening and why Dead House was formed. And you can see some early sneak peeks on the lore section on the website, which we've been, even with recent drops, just doing a few voiceovers and nice little fly-throughs of the game to sort of illustrate to people who are interested in narrative where we're going. So, but yeah, absolutely. There's a lot planned. However, we are big believers in the community, and as we roll things out, we have input and really want to give agency into where we're going and to have a significant influence. So we're going to take it one step at a time. If, as an example, the community said, hey, just do it yourself, we're happy to do so. But I have a feeling that people are all going to want to contribute, and we're going to go in some pretty interesting directions. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, so I got another question on Twitch from Alex Shadank777. His question is, considering how famous Legacy of Kain is for its lore, world building, iconic characters, fame, all these things, is there anything you wish you had done differently?
Oh, with Legacy of Kain?
Yes, in the Legacy of Kain.
Oh yeah, lots of stuff. I guess, so from a technical perspective, this is well known. I've talked about it a lot. My biggest regret being both sort of the world builder and story creator and lead programmer and president of the company, the loading aspects of the on the technical side really bothered me. And in the PC version, they're essentially eliminated here, but the load screens and the delays really bothered me. Affected me for quite a while, and I had to choose between negotiating contracts to actually finishing the code to stream it in, and I never got around to that. So that really bothered me. On the story side, I think for a first, this is our first sort of narrative-driven game. It came before Eternal Darkness and Too Human, and I think it was a good first shot. I think that I think there's some more subtlety in things that I would have done, but I think overall I'm generally happy with it. But there's always mistakes, and some of the things. No, I would say nothing's perfect. I wish there were other things that we would have done. Some of the things were not as developed as I would like to see them, and I had planned on exploring them more later on, but as everyone probably knows, we moved on from Blood Omen Legacy of Kain to do Eternal Darkness afterwards, and I never really got a chance to follow up and explain that. We were going to when we were talking about taking over the series a few years ago, but that never got off the ground, so unfortunately it was never able to revisit it and take another look and show everyone the direction we were going to go. So what we're doing now with Dead House, being the spiritual successor, going to take a lot of where I see the undead fitting into the world of the living, exploring the houses and all the different machinations within a well-developed world, and explore it that way. So of course this will all be original, but in the same spirit, we'll be exploring a lot of the things that I think need to be discussed today. And one of them, I know I'm going on a bit here, but as an example, exploring the meaning of truth and true names in Lamentations, which we just dropped yesterday. I hope that resonates with a lot of gamers out there. Exploring truth and truth being a two-edged sword, I think is something that's well worth discussing and thinking about. And if people are looking for a happy, feel-good story, they probably haven't come to the right place. We want to make people think. We want people to have catharsis, and gamers have catharsis of what their play experiences were, but it's not necessarily going to be a happy ending or something that's going to make you feel good. We do want people to have emotional responses to what we do, but they're not always going to be happy, and that's kind of where I think Kain, where I would have taken it had we moved on, and that's where we're trying to take the original one. So anyway, I know it's kind of a long answer, but I hope that answers the question.
It was a great answer. I believe that many gamers are hungry for that kind of experience.
Cool.
That's why they always think of Blood Omen in such a high regard. Okay, so the next question I have is inspired on the recent video of the vampire that came out. I was gonna ask, is a vampire player limited in the amount of transformations they can make at any point in time? Do they have to previously equip any specific transformation in order to access them in a mission?
So that's a really good question. Some of these things are TBD, but transformations are pretty much going to be determined by skill choices. So going down and exploring skill trees. So with skill trees, of course, you have to make certain decisions and choices, but the idea is to unlock them through skill trees. However, one of the things that we're talking about with the game is not just going straight up skill trees. You will get the opportunity to open up a skill, but getting that skill in, say, Werebat transformation, we want contextual exploration with that and narrative-driven design. So there will be a story around and a background on why you can suddenly transform into, say, a Werebat or a Draco Lich. And so just getting the skill is not going to be enough. It will most likely open a quest line where you can complete it and then do that transformation. That's the ideas we're working towards. Now the number of transformations, that's a whole other question, and that comes down to it's almost like a D&D question. Before you go into an adventure, a wizard can only memorize so many spells, so you pick your spells before you go into the dungeon. Some ARPGs use that system, a lot don't. You just equip them in a panel of 5. So we're currently working through that to try to get the best risk-reward system out there. That's also likely going to be determined by your playstyle and the type of weapon that you're using. And we are doing sort of a combo of the weapons determine a lot of your twitch action and the amount of combos that you have, and your class and your skill tree choices will determine what you can use as part of your arsenal for attacks and spells and transformations. So we're working through those designs as we speak.
Okay, all right. I got another question from Bloodswords88 on Twitch. His question is, in combat, will Dead House have finishing moves like in Eternal Darkness, where your character will crush a skull, or have fatality-like animations?
I really want that in there, yeah. So we were literally talking about that yesterday. So that's going to be the goal. That's one of the great things, too, about not being ISO, being over the shoulder in 3D, and having the perspective essentially of Eternal Darkness, you can do these kind of things and make them really fun. And doing class-specific things and maybe doing some things that are unlocked by what the character does could be a lot of fun. So yes is the answer. When they go in, again, when all of this stuff goes in, we're going to roll out as much as we can, but everyone be patient. This is a big game, as you guys can probably tell by now. It's very ambitious, and we're still in the very early stages, so bear with us.
Of course, we understand. All right, I got a question from Sailor Midgard here on Twitch, and he's asking, will there only be inter-house PvP, or will there be some chance for cooperation?
With the different houses, both PvP and co-op is going to be possible.
Perfect. Is there gonna be PvP with Undead versus Undead then?
So I don't currently see why not, but we're not going to introduce PvP till we introduce other houses. We'll have to see how that goes as we roll it out, but yeah, I don't see a reason to limit it at this point.
Okay, perfect. All right, I've got another question. It's from Blood Omen. And what is the lore behind the Heart of Darkness in Blood Omen? How does Kain obtain it? How does it keep him alive? And why does he encounter so many Hearts of Darkness throughout his journey? Is it just for game mechanics?
There are a lot of these things.
Hearts of Darkness?
Lots of hearts that people
There's lots of Hearts of Darkness. Yeah, so the Hearts of Darkness, of course, were, really symbolic of, I guess the metaphor is a vampire's heart is really dark and black. They're the ultimate power-up for him. And very versatile, can give him life and stuff. But quite frankly, they were a game mechanic thing that game designers were able to drop everywhere. And when we were making the maps, we wanted to be more generous than not. And if you figured out the systems, certainly you could get lots of Hearts of Darkness. So not the most consistent that way. And going all the way back to the question earlier of what is some of the things that you would change with the lore. So we created this, I think, pretty cool story. And then at the same time, we had a lot of the design team with the map maker just jump in and put Hearts of Darkness everywhere. And being this our first game, we didn't really think about these kind of things to keep consistency with the universe and whether that made sense. Those would be some of the kind of things I would improve. I don't know if it really bothers me that much, but the great thing about doing a free-to-play game where we can get a lot of feedback from the community is that we will be able to balance these things as we go. So we'll look for input from everyone for Deadhouse when it comes to doing things like that in the future.
Okay, I imagine it was only a gameplay mechanic, but
Yeah.
it's nice to have a clear answer on that. I have a question in this regard. When I came up with this question, I looked up for information on the internet, and I found out that in a forum at some point, one of the creators for Soul Reaver tried to tie in the lore of Blood Omen with the Soul Reaver continuation. And Amy, I think it was her, mentioned that all the artifacts that Kain found throughout the world was the hearts of people that Janus Odron, as the last ancient vampire, killed. And I was wondering whether you've talked to her during the development of the Soul Reaver series or anything of the sort to try and combine the lore of the two, or if you had any hand at those ideas, that sort of thing.
No. She, I think she probably just made that up as she went. Quite frankly, certainly, yeah, that was not in there when we first created it. Don't think it's a bad narrative element, but certainly not there when we created it.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, we got another question from Raven Scara on Twitch, and his question is: since you mentioned angels, will they also want to kill the living, and if so, why? Because we know that the
That's
undead.
an interesting one. Never even thought about that.
Alchemist, I had not come this
Each
far only
house
to have
will
my
have
glory
its
destroyed.
own agenda, and each house will have its own goals. House of the Dead goals and ambitions will be very different than the House of Angels. And if you look at, say, as an example, just from what we know of Angels, according to our world, there was a war in heaven, and a lot of the angels rebelled, became fallen angels, because they didn't agree with how man was being treated or positioned in the hierarchy of things, and they rebelled because they didn't like it. And though there will be all kinds of political ramifications for those kind of things. So those are the kind of very interesting storylines that I would like to explore, and that we will explore in Dead House for sure.
I gave pursuit to the fleeing wizards, the jewel
Okay,
thing.
perfect.
I danced.
I've got another question from the Evolved 144 on Discord.
Danced upon my
He asks, could we ever join a living faction and kill other undead? Well, what do you have to say about that?
Well, so each time we roll out a house, you'll be able to join that house, and that will bring with it a whole lot of new classes and a whole lot of things that definitely aren't dead. So the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay, perfect. In this same regard, if someone gets to join the game after there are more than one house, if there is, let's say for instance that you release Dead House and Giga House, will the players be able to choose either one of those houses to get started with, or will he have to play through the undead first in order to unlock the others, or things like that?
No, it'll be a living, breathing world. So, say a new player joins at the time when there's 4 houses, they'll be able to pick any of those 4 houses and just start from there and dive right in.
Okay. So I got a big question here from So Dangerous on Discord. I'm gonna read everything he said here. So, what are bosses going to be like in Dead House? Are they going to be your typical tank and spank style bosses like in most MMOs? Or are they going to require strategy, figuring out weaknesses like in the Zelda games? Maybe a mix of both? I'm sure you guys got something special in mind. I like the idea of some enemies being unbeatable in one dead state and requiring exploiting some aspect in other states in order to overcome, like a puzzle.
Yeah, so tank and spank, obviously not the most fun. And I think good boss design takes time. And I think there are some games that really excel in fantastic boss design. So the answer would be more towards, I guess, the Zelda kind of style where you look for weaknesses and puzzles. That's where we want to go with it. Doing bosses is going to be very hard and very challenging, and they take a lot of time. With Legacy of Kain, I think the amount of time spent on bosses was not a lot, though this one seems to be kicking Jalen's ass.
I think it's going to take me longer than it took you guys to design this one, I think.
However, we're going to stay away from the tank and spank kind of bosses. That's the goal anyway.
Okay. I have a question from Discord. What are some examples of generated effects that some weapons will have? For instance, I'm talking about statistics or capabilities that weapons will have, such as life drain or the capacity to summon various sorts of magics, that kind of thing.
Well, statistics that only give you numerical enhancements, I think, are almost a waste. So, like a +5 sword that does +5 damage, I really don't like those kind of designs. So, say let's take it, since I'm watching the fire sword right now with Kain. The idea of a fire sword is that when you hit someone with a fire sword, they will burn and do burning damage over time, having a significant effect on the gameplay. and if something has a weakness to fire, say like an ent or something, then those gameplay ramifications will be apparent to the player. So the type of I guess the type of enhancements or permutations to look at for items in the game, look for things that change gameplay, because that's the focus. So having like just a +5 sword, hopefully we won't have any of that. It's always easier to say and harder to implement, but having things like fire and poison and having all of these different types of effects, which is what frankly I aim for when I was designing Legacy of Kain. That's the direction we would go. But we're going to open up one other brand new element as well, and that's going to be the narrative aspects. So we've got some pretty big ideas when it comes to narrative with the ages and sentient weapons and some of the things that we want to do. So stay tuned for some of that stuff, but it's all going to be based on storytelling, and a sentient weapon, of course, has its own memory and will be able to tell stories, and look for things like that as well that we will be doing. So that's the direction that we want to go with some of the weapons and pickups as well.
Interesting. And do you intend to have procedural generation for some of those effects as well?
Perhaps. I'm always cautious on talking about procedural generation when it comes to pickups, because procedural generation can often give you random results. So we want to make sure that the pickups are always good and balanced in a way that makes sense for gamers. And so in the end, we want to make sure it's balanced well, so people feel rewarded when they play and they're not getting a crappy procedural gen is in the end. So pickups and the way that we generate them need to make sense, is what I'm saying. I think I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Okay, fine. When you mentioned procedural generation, I thought you were mostly talking about cosmetics, but also the statistics of weapons.
Correct.
But it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Keymasterlock has a question on Twitch. He's asking, did you have any plans or lore that you wanted to include about Janos Aldrin?
Oh, from
in the game?
Legacy of Kain?
Yes, in Blood Omen.
We had more lore for Janus Aldrin. I don't think it ever got into the game, and I don't think Crystal ever saw it. I don't remember what we did with it, but we had stories that we wanted to explore more further with him and with the rest of the series. Oh, you've died.
I know.
But so the answer is yes. And we never explored it, unfortunately. But there were some cool things we had in mind, and we, given more time, we would have explored that storyline and done more stuff with him. So.
Okay, so Janos was a character that you had already planned to some extent in Blood Omen. I didn't know that.
Yeah, there was.
Okay.
I think a lot of the characters we had a lot of detailed Bibles on where we wanted to take some of the characters and stuff. So.
All right. Next question comes from Mornblade on Discord. He's asking, will there be any sort of pocket dimensions in Dead House Sonata?
Parallel dimensions, pocket dimensions, absolutely.
That's not what I thought you were about to say.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's something on your face.
No, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big Michael Moorcock fan, and the whole idea of different dimensions, and the world of Nagosa is large, but the universe is larger. So there's going to be all kinds of things that we're going to do within the universe.
I do remember Mornblade specifically mentioned, I think, the painted world from Dark Souls. It was a big painting that you could go into, and it was a whole sort of pocket dimension
stuff. Is
inside
very cool.
of it.
Yeah, we did some of that, a little bit of that in Eternal Darkness, but yeah, absolutely, that stuff is I love that
As
stuff.
Vorador
I
clashed
think it's very
against
cool.
Malik, I gave pursuit to the fleeing wizards, the Jewel and Bane.
Okay, so our next question is from Varric Keldon on Discord. He's asking, will there be a maximum level, and after more content, will this level max increase? I think he's asking about level caps and whether expansions will increase those caps.
Most likely, yes.
Okay, in that same regard, will there be any sort of prestige system that you are thinking of, maybe for resetting people who have reached the cap a bit too soon before an expansion is released?
Yes, yes and no. Where we really want to explore some of this stuff, and where I want to really push the envelope is on the narrative side. A lot of ARPGs in general look at level caps, and they look at that as the be-all and end-all. So your character is defined by your skill tree, and all the things that you do in the game are defined by loot. I think there's different ways that we can take that, and we're going to try to explore that with story. So we want to have some story parameters in there too. That sorry, Cheesy. I just bumped Cheesy there. I don't know if you guys can see him on camera, but he was coming around saying hello.
No,
And
a little bit.
Rev is over here in the blanket. By the way, that's why the blanket's here. He's sleeping over here. And so the whole idea of having your character grow through narrative is one of the really big things that we want to explore with Dead House. Hello, Cheesy. Hey, buddy, come here.
There he is.
Buddy. Oh,
Come here. There we go.
there is Mr. Cheese. Hey, buddy.
The
How
big
are ya?
cheese himself.
Hey, Lord Cheeseburger. What a good boy you are. Hey, buddy.
Mm-hmm. All right, may I fire up the next one?
Absolutely.
Okay, Sailor Midgard from Discord is asking that in Blood Omen, at the Lightning Shrine, there is a black obelisk with red runes on it. He's asking if there's any story or lore behind it.
We were going to do something like that, and I'm trying to remember what it was. The thing is, some of these questions are so detailed, and we're going back like 20 years plus development time. I know we definitely had plans for that, and I frankly can't remember what we were going to do there, but that was meant to be something special. I will think about it and try to answer it in a future stream if I can remember, or I'll talk to some of the guys about when we made that stuff if they can remember.
All right, we'll have to note this question down then. All right, okay, Very Keldon on Discord asks, are characters going to level up and learn skills and abilities most game nowadays, or something along the lines of no levels, just training certain abilities, such as Ultima Online comes to mind? Okay, let me try to rephrase what he said.
Okay.
He's asking if you will be able to level only the skills and abilities of your characters instead of your characters specifically, and training those skills.
Yeah, definitely there's going to be skills, for sure. Obviously, I think right now we do have, we are going in the direction of player levels. Exactly how we do that and what exactly we're going to do, we haven't ruled out yet, and I don't want to say anything that's too premature at this point. But I guess the quick answer is we plan on doing both.
Okay, perfect. And a question that I had asked on Discord before, will we be able to jump and move over obstacles in the game?
Probably. Now, if there's going to be like a parkour game, and will there be height-based puzzles with, different blocks and stuff to move around? That's a whole other mechanical system that we are talking about and is currently under discussion. So TBD on some of that stuff.
All right. But it is already defined that some characters will have the capacity to fly, just like the werebed.
Correct.
Right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, another question that I had, are all transformations related to essence, or is there some kind of transformation that belongs to another realm, such as the magical?
No, absolutely. There's other transformations related to other realms, for sure.
Okay. By the way, for the people on Twitch, whenever you ask a question, if there is something that I interpreted incorrectly when reading your question, feel free to ask for clarification. I'll ask Dennis about it, okay? Okay, stand by for the next question.
Sure.
How many equipment slots will each character have available?
That's a good question. Not contemplated yet. Probably 2. Like if you mean like if you mean like what weapons are you going to have equipped? Like do you have different build outs? Typical ARPGs generally have 2.
No, actually, I'm asking about whether you have, for instance, a space for your headgear, for your chest gear.
Oh, what's the sort of paper doll
bracelets?
I see. Yeah. So, the what we're doing is head, chest, arms, legs, torso. Rings and capes, of course, and we're looking at a double paper doll system where there's one for things you pick up in the game and then there's one for cosmetics. So regardless of what loot you have, you can modify the look of your character to look like anything if you want to. So you could have with the current Founders Pack, you could have the Revenant armor, or the Malleus Odium armor, I should say, and use that while you're playing, and have like an epic sword of flame on your current character, and all this stuff would match in. But there'll be 2 paper doll systems, one for cosmetics and one for in-game. That's the way we plan on doing it.
That's great. It's not that nice when you have a piece of equipment that is absolutely great, but it looks horrible.
Yeah.
So it's good to be able to customize their looks.
That's the goal.
Yeah. Or the other way around, when good armor.
Or the other way around,
nice.
precisely.
Yeah.
Okay, along the same lines, we know that characters themselves have different elements to them: the vitality, the magical, the essential. Will items also have that sort of characteristic to them? Will your items change, for instance, if you move to the magical realm from the reality realm, the vitality and the physical?
It's a good question. TBD. I don't know the answer to that right now. The reason I say that is certainly sentient weapons and armors we plan on having. Essentially, they're almost like full characters on their own. And but what happens in Elder Futhar?
I was just about to say
Or Bloodscript in Legacy of Kain. So, in exploring how the death states work, we have a write-up on the lore page now. Making sure that plays well and it plays properly is going to be one of the big things that we want to explore, particularly in the first age, going from all the 3 realms and what it means to have true death as undead. So we want to explore all of those kind of things, and so how the weapons work when you change states is going to be a big part of that, and that is to be explored still. TBD.
Okay, perfect. All right, we got a question from Fruit Customer on Twitch. He's asking, how will you make sure all different classes are balanced so there won't be an obvious advantage in choosing one over another?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's only, I think only one answer to that is hard work and getting a lot of feedback from the community. So I think the bottom line is these things are so difficult to do that we're going to work hard for everyone who is invested time and money in the game and make it as best we can and get continual feedback from everyone in the community to balance it as best we can.
All right. Elvion on Twitch is asking a double-sided question. He's asking, are the character skills going to work exclusively through skill slots, and are there going to be skills that enhance or change normal actions such as attacking, blocking, dodging, etc.?
That's a great question. Okay, so two things. Combos and certain attacks are going to be based off of weapons. So depending on the weapons that you equip, you will get different skill combos and different finishing moves and that kind of thing. Skills will also give you unique combinations of spells and other abilities. And the idea is we're going to merge those two systems together. So typically, in a game like, say, Diablo or Path of Exile, all your combos and skills are based off a skill tree. That's not how we're doing it here. We're going to have the twitch factor in the gameplay be based off the weapons, and the strategic factor or tactical factor be based off the skills, and we're going to merge those two together. Depending on the character class, some will focus on more tactical areas than others, and some will be more visceral and have more twitch mechanics. But again, that's going to be modified by what type of weapons you're going to choose to play with, swords versus staves or morning stars or whatever you're going to choose, make your weapon of choice. That's going to determine what kind of combos you have and how they will mix and mingle with your current skill sets and abilities that you've chosen from your skill trees. Hope that makes sense.
Okay, sure, it does make sense. Let me know if you want more clarification on Twitch. I'll be listening to you people. And I would like to expand on that a little bit. He asked if regular actions such as attacking, blocking, etc. will change according to your character's development. I want to know a little bit more in this direction as well. If you have, for instance, the vampire, which is a hybrid class, and he's very fast-paced, he can run and do all sorts of stuff. If you focus him on the magical side, for instance, would you change the way that irregular actions such as attacking, blocking, dodging, etc. would happen if you take him towards one specialty?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes. So as an example, say you're really focused on the magical side, maybe you'll have some kind of dodge roll that is either more towards the physical or comes standard just with vampire no skills. Maybe an improved dodge would be just literally changing to mist form and not moving at all, and the swords will go through you, or be doing something like a rat swarm where you dissipate and then come back together in a different location. These are the different kind of things that we can use. This is what I would say falls into the ability realm. So though it would be the same sort of thing as a dodge key, these skills would have very different effects. That's the direction and idea we want to take things towards. Hope that answers that question.
Great. Sure. That's an interesting direction indeed. Okay, I had a question about the classes. Will any class be able to actually about interaction with the enemies? Will any class be able to grab and carry enemies to various Will we be able to grab enemies or carry them around?
Very specific again on just like where you'll be able to throw enemies on stakes. Probably is the answer, I think, on that one. So I think the answer is likely yes for that one.
Okay.
The other one is a little bit more tenuous, where we're going to be using the environments for kills, grabbing enemies, and having interactions with enemies are highly likely, especially if we want to do a visceral game, which is what we want to do.
Okay, great. Another question I had is about the vampire. Is the white hair a default aesthetic for the vampires, or is there any particular reason for them to have white hairs?
No. I think the amount of customization and things that we put in for the gamer are going to be quite a bit. So if you want a Nosferatu-looking vampire that's got no hair, that's all going to be possible. And that is on the rollouts of things. So right now we have I would say a Legacy of Kain or an Elric-looking vampire, but that doesn't mean your vampire has to look like that. And if you look at on the website, we also have what I would say a more Nosferatu-looking vampire whose head is completely shaved, also wearing some warlord-type armor. So that's going to all come down to customization. And which I mentioned in another previous stream, the Age of Death is going to be another thing that we're going to talk about as well. We want, usually with vampires, their look is sort of locked in when they were turned, but you could have something like, say, a Revenant that is, say, 10,000 years old. Will that mean he's mostly dust or spirit when he removes his armor, or is he newly ripe, or his flesh is still rotting? What will that mean for gameplay, and what does that mean for story and narrative are the things that we're going to explore with sort of the Age of Death idea.
The city was paved in blood.
Vampires might only get more handsome as they get more magically inclined, if anything.
Yeah, but some lores have vampires mutating over time. All kinds of things and fun things to explore, and mutations I think are almost like mixing different houses. You're moving along really well in the game. You're progressing quite far. It's good to see.
Okay, great. This is something that I'm curious to see how we will take in the game. All right, Elvion on Twitch has another question. He's asking, will we be able to transform one of our characters into a weapon?
Yeah, I almost need more context for that question. What does that mean?
If you would like to expand a little bit, perhaps the white is as he's focused on the essential realm, perhaps he is more focused into weapons, perhaps he can transform himself into a weapon of sorts? I'm shooting in the dark here.
Yeah. So I don't... If he means, or she, or who's ever forwarding the question, if we're talking about will characters be able to potentially, instead of doing something like a werebat transformation that the vampire has, turning into like a golem of some kind or some kind of construct as a shape-shifting form, I guess something like that is possible. I just don't want to give too much of the story away. We have lots of stuff like that planned for the future. And a lot of the transformations are not fully designed or worked out yet, as we're so early in the process. But if that's something the gaming community wants to see, just let us know in the suggestions area, because once again, we feel we work for gamers, so it's certainly not that difficult to put something like that in, and I think the only thing that we'd always want to caution everyone, if we start going to like pink unicorns and stuff like that, that's going to be a tough stretch trying to keep the gothic mood. But if people have some pretty cool ideas, we certainly are interested in hearing them all.
Yeah.
Okay, Elvion clarified.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Jalen. Okay, Elvion clarified his question a little bit. He said, will we be able to sacrifice one character, to create another powerful sentient weapon that we can equip on another character?
Sort of
transform one character into a weapon that you use on another character.
If you gave up a powerful character to turn him into an artifact or something.
Yeah, yeah, that's something that would be the creation of a very powerful sentient weapon or something that is something I've been thinking about quite a bit. particularly with the ages. So say you play a character, I don't know, for like 4 years, and you're like, okay, I'm done with this character, and you decide to maybe change. It would have to be a permanent change. That would be something very interesting to explore, especially if that character was famous, as far as people knew in the game. And the whole idea about being able to give that away certainly opens up some very interesting narrative possibilities that I certainly would like to explore. So I've actually, when it comes to ages and things like that, I think that's a fantastic idea, and we have been discussing that.
Yes, that's an interesting idea, and I suppose it could work sort of as a prestige system that we were talking about earlier. The only issue I think is that most people, I don't know about most people, I wouldn't want to sacrifice a character that I spent 4 years in the making to make a weapon or anything of the sort, but I'd be willing to create secondary characters for this purpose.
Yeah, well, who knows what people will want to do in the game. I agree, but you know, there's always a what's the right reward, risk-reward kind of factor. And if someone played a character for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and they decided to make it a sentient weapon, that would be one pretty awesome sentient weapon.
Should be.
It should be. It should be like one of the best things in the game, and because it literally, that's what you're essentially saying is you're crafting something for 4 years. When you think about it, and what would that mean? I personally, we're doing some things. A lot of people, we have some plans for big data, and a lot of people see big data as means of marketing and doing things to, you know, in many ways take advantage of people. And imagine if we started using big data for narrative, where we actually were able to pull a lot of what people do in the game and put it towards something that people actually want, like story. And I think there's a lot of potential in that direction, and that's something we're definitely going to be exploring. And that's, you know, one of the main reasons why we're using Lumberyard and really connected with AWS and all of the servers, because having the computation ability of some of the things that we want to do, I only think are possible, frankly, with being able to do some parallel computing on the cloud, even if it's in the background, and doing some of this crunching with big data that we have planned. I think there's some pretty interesting things. So, very exciting. Probably shouldn't be talking about it so early, but why not? It's a live stream, so there you have it.
It's always interesting to see the visionary way that you guys talk about the development of this game.
Well, thanks.
Okay, Alex Shandek777 has a cheeky question on Twitch. He's asking, will we be able to craft a soul-sucking weapon with a snaked blade body and skull handguard and name it Soul Reaver?
Oh, sure. Like, I don't know. I'm sure the number of permutations, you know, these are these are very... certainly, Deadhouse Sonata is going to be very different than Legacy of Kain, but you know, certainly the amount of customization and permutations, I think most people should be able to, you know, mimic things that they would like to see that are out there. You know, we'll never, at least as far as at this point anyway, there are no plans to license anything from the Legacy of Kain universe, but who knows, maybe in the future. If you know, we decide that this is something that fans really, really want, then who knows, maybe we can bring some and talk to Square Enix about bringing some of the authentic lore from Blood Omen Legacy and Kain and putting it into Deadhouse or something, or vice versa, who knows what. So.
Okay, I got another question about the vampires. We know that in the Deadhouse universe, vampires already have some traditional weaknesses, such as having sunlight weaken them and running water being extremely dangerous. But what about other kinds of vulnerabilities, such as garlic or stakes at the heart?
Yeah, so we're going to want to... That's the best way to describe this. I'm a big fan of research and doing a lot of research into vampires and... having a holistic view on how they should work. Also doing research into other vampire lore that's really not that well known. In Kain, we tried to stay really traditional to sort of the Gothic lore, the Bram Stoker's sort of definition of vampires, where vampires could walk in the sunlight. They were just weakened and weren't as strong as they were at night. And we really followed a lot of that. And Bram Stoker the movie was a huge inspiration for Legacy of Kain in many ways. We'll continue with that with Deadhouse, and at the same time, we're going to do research into other types of vampires that are commonly known, and in some sense, maybe give players the option to explore those through decisions and choices where you can really model a vampire. So when people see you, they'll be like, well, that's a vampire, but it's got some pretty weird things about it that I haven't seen before. Those are going to be some of the things we're going to try to explore. Again, given time, these are very things way down the pipe. But the great thing about having a game that's online, that's living and breathing, is we can constantly modify things as we go. And the current plan right now, obviously with Deadhouse, is to have 7 classes of undead, but we're obviously, at least I think at this point, going to want to introduce more classes. But with 9 houses and 7 classes with each house, there's a lot of classes already, and so we'll have to take it one step at a time.
Okay. Another question about the vampire. We know that the vampire uses his own blood to cast magic. Is there any way for him to use magic instead, or any other kind of meter in another form, perhaps?
Yeah, there's discussions on that now, and so blood magic is the whole idea of using your blood and your life force to cast spells, and then there's just straight up magic as well. Legacy of Kain used a separate magic system where you have the orb on the one side and the blood meter on the other. We are talking about having both systems, and what would be the pluses and minuses of each system when a player chooses which direction they want to go in. So we are exploring both.
Okay. Another thing about the vampire that I was wondering is whether we are able to switch forms freely, or if we are limited in any way to do so. For instance, if we have to have our maximum level of adrenaline or blood filled up before we can transform. Is there any such limitation?
I think that will be dependent on class and the transformation that you want to do, and also you also have to layer that with the states that you're in. Some transformations will be based on states, like what transformations will keep you in the ethereal state versus the physical state. There's all of these things too that we haven't really shown a lot of yet, and that we're going to explore in the game.
Interesting. Usually when we have hybrid classes in a game, they are only mildly effective in each of their respective roles there are. With the vampire being hybrid in that house, how will he be a master of none of these roles, or will others always be able to overcome him in a given role or challenge?
Yeah, so I think that's a design conundrum. So if you're, and here's where I think, and how we're tackling where I think we're going to be able to overcome that. So a lot of systems, when they have hybrid characters, their entire systems are based upon skill trees and purely gameplay from those skill trees. Because we are not going to do that, because we're going to have a hybrid, the class itself is going to be very distinct, and it's going to allow you to do things that other classes will not. So even though it's a hybrid in the trinary archetype system, each class is going to stand out on its own and be very, very different. So vampires will have the most transformations. They're just, each character class is going to be different on its own. So I feel pretty good in that, and that our design is not fully reliant upon the skill tree system. So if you take something like Path of Exile, and this is not a criticism of Path of Exile, it is just a design that they chose. Path of Exile, all the classes are essentially based off of their graph, their skill graph. And as a matter of fact, the starting class that you choose only your character only differentiates in the sense of where you start on that graph, and then I think there's some specializations afterwards. But at the end of the day, they're essentially all the same. So hybrids in there, you can run into trouble because actually balancing that out and seeing the difference between them can be quite hard. But with the vampire, as an example, we already know that he's going to be mechanically one of the most quickest classes and one that will have a lot of shape shifting compared to other classes. We just have to make sure that the shape shifting is cool and that the fast combat really makes a difference in the game more compared to other classes. And that's the idea. So don't just think his design is solely reliant upon the trinary archetype system. That gives you sort of a general map on how things are going to go, but the actual gameplay feel and the usefulness of the class will be defined by design principles that are solely related to that class alone.
The cathedral remained untouched.
Okay, so he doesn't stand in the shadows of anyone. If he decides to focus on the physical realm, he is not gonna try to compete with the Revenant. He's gonna be his own kind of physical.
Oh yeah, physical vampire. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So a Revenant is driven by hatred and is just a bruiser all the time. But you can have a bruiser vampire, but you can also have a very magical vampire. And however, the type of skills and magics that they do will be very different than the Lich. It's not easy, but I am cautiously optimistic through narrative and through feel. And through not just solely relying on the skill trees themselves, that it won't be a master of none kind of class.
Okay, and another doubt that I had about this, let's say the Revenant wants to try and focus on building something counterintuitive, such as focusing on the magical aspect, even though the Revenant is by nature not focused on that. Could he do something of the sort?
Yep.
And be effective at that?
So, the right way to describe that. We want people to be able to explore the system and come up with things that are emergent. That's what I call emergent gameplay. And if there's likely to be combinations that we haven't thought of that will work just fine and be really cool. We're not necessarily opposed to them as long as they're not game breaking. So we're going to leave that to the gamers, and as players play, if they find that there's going to be so as an example, a very magical based Revenant, would that be like Malik in Legacy of Kain, where he's essentially a ghost in armor? Maybe, right? So the ways that players choose to play, we want gamers to be able to explore all of those ways, and we just want to make sure the experience for for each class is unique, and all as much directions that gamers want to take, we want to give gamers as much variety as possible for them to explore and do things with the game that we potentially haven't even thought of.
Nice, I like the sound of that. Okay, Favorite Custom has a question for us on Twitch. He's asking if the game will have stealth elements that help you against other players and NPCs alike.
Yeah, that's currently under debate right now. Some people really like stealth, some people do not. The problem with stealth is in a frantic environment, it's really hard to use that stuff cohesively with like an all-out war scenario, but possibly. So we're exploring that, and I've obviously done, with Metal Gear Solid, a lot of hey Rev, a lot of stealth mechanics, and I think they certainly have their place. Whether we can fit it into Dead House Sonata cohesively with all the classes is TBD. There's certainly people fighting for it. A lot of people want to see stealth, so we'll see.
Yes, I'm interested in seeing stealth mechanics as well, but I guess that will depend on what sort of gameplay we'll have, especially in the PvP. Um, Actually, in that regard, if I know there are still a lot to be determined in this matter, but I was wondering if you have such asymmetrical classes for each house, versus another house. For instance, the Giga house versus the undead. Would the PvP itself change the whole gameplay mechanics? For instance, we have a somewhat arcade game, fighting game right now with Dead House. If we were to fight against a house that is so different from everything we have already, would the game change potentially to something like a strategy game at some point, or stuff like that? For stealth to be possible, or any other mechanic that you can have on the regular game.
Yeah, no. So the way it's definitely very asymmetrical, and until, in some sense, it's a spoiler if I say exactly how we're going to do that. Will the different houses play very differently? Yes, absolutely. However, will we ever become a different genre like an RTS or anything like that? I don't think so. I think we're primarily always going to be a third-person action-adventure game that you can play cooperatively and that's narrative-driven. That's always going to be the case. Whether we do, whether we introduce different houses or PvP, that's essentially what our game is going to be. Now, will there be many different strategies on how the different factions or houses play off each other? Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be crazy, and I'm really looking forward to that. And one of the things that I like to think about a lot, just to try to show some of the asymmetry that we have in mind, if you have Giga House, House of the Giants, fighting Dead House, you'll have giants fighting undead, and giants are very, very different, are a lot bigger than typical undead. And what would a fight like that be like? And how could we do it in a meaningful way that's balanced and yet at the same time very different? I think there's a lot of fun to be had there, so we're really looking forward to exploring that.
Okay, perfect. All right, Elvion has a question for us on Twitch. So there will be a health meter, a magic meter. How about a stamina meter for non-magic attacks and other actions?
So there's going to be a health meter, a magic meter, an essence meter. So there's 3 of those. We've talked about stamina. We've talked about other sort of charge elements. That's TBD. We'll see how the classes play. We may have elements that go outside the trinary archetype system. That is to be determined, if it makes sense. But then you're starting to get into 4 meters, and that can get quite complicated. And we don't know. We want to make sure we don't create something that is just too complex to understand.
In the early gameplay footage you've shown us, the vampire had only a health meter and a yellow bar right below it. Was that akin to a stamina meter?
Yes, that was only prototype stuff though, but it was. Yes.
But I suppose there is still the potential for adding maybe not a meter, but some kind of gauge for your stamina. For instance, let's say that the capacity to dodge was limited to 3 stacks, and you'd have some other kind of charge that would have a different representation than a meter, than a bar that you see on the interface, that could be integrated in order to add to variety of mechanics. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So that's definitely possible and likely to happen. We'll just have to wait and see as we, flesh out all the mechanics for all the classes. We're not opposed to it. I just don't want to commit to anything at this point, and it could be very class specific. So some may have them, some might not. Time will tell.
Class specific. Okay, that's a great way of taking it. All right. Dennis, can you talk a little bit about the trinary archetype system? There are some people interested in knowing more about that.
Yeah, the trinary archetype system is really 3 areas in which the foundation of Dead House is all balanced. So we have the physical realm, where that's where vitality or essentially health is. So that's your health area. and then we have the magical realm, which has mana, and then we have the essential realm, which deals with the soul, and we have essence. And so, really, when it comes to thinking about the undead and playing the undead, we wanted to do something really, really different. So, in most games, when your health meter runs out, you die. But being undead really thought a lot of what it means to be undead philosophically, and many people believe being dead is just changing states. And so we've really created the entire system to be a state system where, imagine you have 3 meters. You have the physical meter or vitality, the magical meter or mana, and the essential meter that has essence. And if you're, let's just use the vampire as, now let's use a lich, because this comes towards a phylactery, maybe it will resonate more with people. But we have essentially a system that works with phylacteries across all the undead. So you're a lich, you have a vessel, you're taking life force from someone to power your spells, you're taking their life force and you're casting mana like there's no tomorrow, and you're killing people, but you're taking damage, and then you take damage so that your vitality goes to 0, and then suddenly you still have some magic left. Then you go to the ethereal realm, and then you become a ghost essentially, or something that is non-corporeal. And then you're fighting, say, some priests, and they start casting magic on you with some warlocks and wizards, where they're able to damage you while you're in the non-physical form, the ethereal form, and then all your magic goes to 0, and then suddenly, boom, you're locked into a mirror that you carry with you, and your essence is in that mirror. And they know that. Then they start creating. All the priests start gathering around, and we'll start doing an exorcism to get your essence out of that mirror that will finally kill you. So you have all these different state changes, and the whole idea of Dead House is to have different classes that interact differently with these different states. So while they're trying to do this exorcism, I'm just creating a scenario, trying to describe a scenario so everyone can kind of understand it. You can have a vampire who you're playing co-op with knows that you're now caught in your phylactery, and if he doesn't kill the people doing the exorcism, they're going to remove your essence from this item that you're gonna hit permadeath and go back to dust and be removed from the level. So everyone starts fighting around you and trying to stop this exorcism from occurring so you can come back. That's the whole idea of the trinary archetype system, was how can we deal with death, how can we create classes that are unique and balanced, and then at the same time asymmetrical. So that's sort of the idea of the system. And some character classes, if you go to the website, the primary starting state will say physical, but say you're a wraith or a banshee, some of them will be non-corporeal, which will mean they'll start in the spirit state, or in the magical state, where there will be not physical, and they'll generally be in the magical realm of things, and going to a physical form is not their default form, and are weaker and will have limitations. So when you switch different states, each different class will have a particular gameplay element associated with that, and how they react in all those different forms will be is something we really want to explore and are excited to explore. And some of them, some of the classes, like say the white, are very, very powerful in the contained form or the phylactery form. So there's some really neat things that I'm excited, that I think bring a certainly unique spin to action RPGs and RPGs in general, and not to even mention all the lore that we have ready to roll out. So that's the idea of the trinary archetype system. I hope that makes sense.
Sure. All right, I got a question about the narrative aspect of that house. Since this is an RPG, will we be able to have conversations with the characters? Will our characters have voices? That kind of thing?
Yes, and we have some crazy, unbelievable things planned for that area that are so far out there. I don't want to even talk about them yet, except we haven't seen it anywhere before, and we're excited to roll that out in the future when we start talking about that stuff. The deep social media integration ties well within this, but this is all new stuff, and it's pretty crazy where we want to take it, and it's got a lot to do with some of the topics I talked about before. But again, undiscovered country. There you go. You have the soul.
Okay, so in this regard, feel free to let me know if this is not something that you are ready to talk about yet. But you've been mentioning the Twitch integration before, and about how people could potentially choose what outcome a certain situation would have in the streamer's game.
Yep.
Will they be able to choose, for instance, what the streamer's character would say?
So we want to have interaction from people who are watching on Twitch or other social media platforms, to have agency into the game, to affect the game, affect the storyline, quite frankly, and affect what we call the entire world. So we see things at both a micro and macro level. A micro level would be in the specific instance, in the specific game that they're watching. On a macro level, and I know these are sort of computer sciencey terms, but on a macro level, be able to affect the entire game for everybody. And we'll be rolling out some of those examples in the near future, how we're going to do that. But I think they're quite fun, and I'm excited to talk about those soon.
Interesting. Okay, and considering this is also a cooperative game, how will conversations be handled when there are two or more players playing together and one of them strikes up a conversation with an NPC, for instance?
I guess the best way to do it would be to do it as naturally as possible. So, say, Zan, you and I are hanging out, and you walk up to a storekeeper, and you start talking to them. I'd be with you, and maybe I would jump in and have conversations as well from time to time. That would be how I would try to handle it, as naturally as possible, as things happen from day to day. Obviously, everyone can't be all talking at once, because that would make no sense. Or I guess it could make sense if there's an argument and no one's listening to each other and everyone's fighting. But still, at the end of the day, there are ways to figure that out, and we have some interesting ideas on how we want to handle some of those conversational aspects of the game.
Okay. Looking forward to seeing what you got in store. All right, I got another question that is about the 333. I've seen in the website that your email is something at Apocalypse333, and I've seen this in Eternal Darkness. It's something important to some of the puzzles, and there's also some small Easter eggs in the game. I've seen a desk clock in one of the bedrooms in the Eternal Darkness that had 333 in it as well. Where did it came from?
3-3, yeah, that's some numerology. 333 is a very powerful number, and it's got many meanings across the board, and I think that the numbers were chosen carefully when we first started creating the company, and that really revolves around change. The 333 number on the website revolves around change and the revealing of new things and things to come, which is why we called the company Apocalypse. A lot of people think of Apocalypse as the end of the world, but it's actually ancient Greek to reveal things that are previously unknown. In Revelation, they have what's called the Apocalypse, but it's Revelation does talk about the end of the world, but the actual apocalypse is to reveal new things to mankind that they have never seen before. And that's when Apocalypse thinks about games, we want to create new things in games that people haven't thought about, and change the way people think and play games. So that's the whole idea for the 333 and Apocalypse and all of those things. So I hope that makes sense.
Sure, thank you. Speaking about cooperation again, how will some puzzle actually will some puzzles be designed to be solved together with other players, or would one player be the leader of the party who would be the mastermind for solving puzzles in the game?
So yeah, it's I think can really be important that people be able to play solo at all times, but as well, obviously having some cooperative puzzles would be really cool. So the only way that I can think of handling that right now is to have some content that's made specifically for co-op and some specifically for single player. If we can come up with ways to make sure that we're always going to try to make sure that they overlap as much as possible. But you know, the typical puzzle of say having 2 pressure plates to open a door. You know, I guess you can always move a rock over and put it on a pressure plate. So there are ways to get around some of these puzzles. But some things like that would be, I think, desired for gamers. We do want to make sure that we're not forcing people to play cooperatively. I think that's a sort of an old leftover from, you know, online games when they first started, that we have to show people how powerful it is to play with your friends. I think everyone gets that right now. I think people just want whatever experience they want to get out of the game and what they're looking for. So our goal is to cater for what gamers want at all times. So that's always going to be our focus. So you're never going to see, at least I hope not, we're going to try to avoid, I guess is the best way to say it, forcing people down directions that we think they should go, rather than listening to the gaming community and telling us what they want. And you're going to find that we're very, very open in why we're doing these streams once a week. You know, why Jalen is here, why Scott is here. We were trying to be as open as possible. Why we showed our prototype so early, you know, and we got a lot of criticism for it. And it's good, though. It's, you know, that feedback has helped us adjust very, very quickly. And we're continuing to take all the feedback that we get almost on a weekly basis. It's changing the game all the time. I can't even... it's very difficult for me to summarize how many changes we've made because of the community already. But I will say this. The Legacy of Kain community has massively had an influence on where we're taking things already. And when I first created the concept of Dead House, it had the spiritual successor to Legacy of Kain right on the front page. And when we first started talking about Dead House, we decided to remove that for various reasons. And then this year, when I said, hey, I think we should start talking about this now, we wanted Dead House to sort of stand on its own so people knew it was an original game. But now at the same time, getting the feedback from gamers, it feels like coming home. And I feel that I really understand the community from Legacy of Kain, and it's really helping us mold where we're taking Dead House. So I think the combination of all of those things will hopefully, you know, take it home for everyone. But you know, time will tell, and we look forward to hearing from you guys. So.
Well, as a player myself who is invested in that house already, I feel it's absolutely great that you guys are open to hearing our ideas. And it's nice to have that kind of interaction. It's not many games would allow that sort of thing. Not many developers would even want to hear people. So it's definitely an interesting approach.
Yeah, it is. I'll tell you one thing. It's scary for sure. We've had like our partners at Amazon. they're working with a lot of people, and they've said to me, "Wow, you're showing a lot of stuff really early. More than there are a lot of games that are going to be yet to be announced that are using Lumberyard that are fantastic. I can't wait for those to come out." And but we showed things that were literally just out of prototype. We literally had the demo together, and we said, let's make a video, let's drop it up. That's where the IGN video came from. And yeah, it's funny, as a prototype for video games, pretty good. You know, you're lucky to have textures. But I think a lot of people are used to seeing games a couple months before they're released, and we're not close to there yet. So we've got a long way to go. And even with the first age is going to be very, very early. So we're a few years out compared to people looking for some of the games that are shipping now that have just been announced 6 months ago. The AAA market really will release games 6 months afterwards, and do their best to try to adjust to feedback. But let's face it, if you're working on a game for 4 or 5 years, any feedback you get in the last 5% of the project, it's really hard to turn that boat around. So it's not that, and I want to be clear, I'm not criticizing people or the marketing people. They really do try to take consumer feedback, but it's the model itself doesn't really give. This is one of my favorite levels. Does not really give the opportunity for people to adjust. And the model that we're going for right now, and this type of feedback, it's scary as a game designer, because you're putting yourself out there, opening yourself up for massive amounts of criticism, and you love your game, and it hurts to get fierce criticism, and we've gotten some, but in the end, our goal is that we want to make the game as best as possible, and we're only getting that through feedback through you guys. And Zan, our conversations that we've had numerous ones, your feedback on some things, even helping us out with the website and saying, hey, this isn't that clear, helping with typos, you've been amazing. I think all things in this regard are super, super helpful. So we really appreciate it. I think it's the right way to go. You don't see a lot of people doing it because it's really scary and it's really hard. So, but I'm excited about it.
Me too. Thank you. Okay, let me ask you something real quick. I guess our time is running out. About the puzzles, cooperatively, how do you stop people from trolling the puzzles? Will there be any mechanics to do so?
That's a good question. I guess we need to explore that and what trolling actually means. We're pretty big on letting people do what they want. The only way I can describe it is, let's see what happens. I know rocket jumping, I'll use rocket jumping in Quake as a really good example. At first that was considered a bug, and they removed it for a short time, I believe, but then they realized later that players really liked rocket jumping in Quake, or in Doom. I think it was in Quake when it first started happening, and they put it back in. And so let's see what trolling actually turns out to be. Wouldn't it be interesting if we had a risk-reward mechanic or something narrative-wise that we could work in with trolling that could make it very detrimental for gamers, or maybe not detrimental, but have a lasting effect where they would be known. Like, I remember in EverQuest, as an example, I used to love watching Pinky the Bard videos where a character would run around, take all his clothes off and run around and basically train all the sand giants into the newbie area, and everyone would die.
Yes.
That was so fun watching those videos. I know that caused a lot of trouble, but I used to just love watching and waiting for those videos to come out. So there's got to be a way to do this in the right way. So that's my answer to that. I want to explore it.
I forgot about Pinky the Bard.
Yeah.
Pinky the Bard was the boss.
Okay, I have a question about the ages system. If a player character becomes a prominent figure in the lore, how much control the player have over their ascended character's future actions? For instance, if one of your characters transforms himself into a god in the story, who will take control of that character from them on?
Well, that's very interesting, right? That's an interesting question to explore. So, who you are versus what people think of you are often are very different. If someone's going to be ascended and become a godlike figure, that's who's to say that isn't just a super high level character, a character level of 1,000. And I only say that because I'm just throwing the content. So I don't think players should ever lose control of their characters unless they want to give it up, is the answer. Now, people telling stories about you and saying things that aren't necessarily accurate or are true to what happened, that's part of history and part of human nature. So I think working some of these things in with some of the big data things that I talked about earlier certainly is interesting. So as far as loss of control goes, I think we put players in ultimate control. They can do what they want with the characters. If they want to turn them into an ascended god or a sentient weapon, or who else knows what retiring characters could do. I think there's a lot of interesting options, and putting it into a narrative level is a narrative perspective is the most interesting for me, for other players to enjoy, quite frankly. So, like, as the lasting impression that Pinky the Bard had on me from EverQuest. So I think there's a lot of unexplored territory there, and a lot of fun stuff that we can do. So that's the answer to that. So you would only give up, you only lose control if you wanted to give it up. If what it would be like to be a walking god, if you were to play, like if you had a character that was 10 ages old, and everyone else looked at you and no one had the chance to kill you, what would you do in that kind of world? Would you become benevolent or malevolent, or, you know, lots of fun stuff there, lots of undiscovered territory. So let's see what happens.
And if I may ask for clarification on one aspect that you've talked about before in one of the streams, I remember someone asked about whether if you could raise a whole village of zombies, and that village was a procedurally generated place, and you mentioned other players could find that location later on. You mentioned that would have to be handpicked by the developers as an event that is an event that was triggered. How would that work exactly? How do you identify something interesting happening in one player's perspective?
Right. So I let me try to be as clear as I can on that. So if you were to raise a village, we want to give players the option to make that emergent, and say you go on a quest, or there's a city that just forms, or that you're going to go into a city that forms. You have such an impact on the story and the lore that becomes a permanent fixture on the continent. Cities can be razed, castles can be burned to the ground. In different ages, they'll become ruins, castles will become ruins, and all of that kind of stuff. All of players affecting the storyline in that is where we want to go with it. So even though some things will be procedurally generated, procedural generation is going to be what I would say reserved for the unimportant things. The important things need to be planned and need to be a permanent fixture. Otherwise, what's the point, right? Then it just becomes random, and we don't. It becomes unmemorable. I think that's, use procedural generation where it helps us. I look at it as a tool. When we introduce our map making tools, we'll procedurally generate all the grunt work for people who want to make the levels. But like you're going through the cathedral in Avernus here, that would be something that people would want to be totally planned out, and other people could visit it, and what gamers do in these aspects, other people could see and relive those things, and leave their mark upon that area too. That's the idea. Hope that makes sense.
Perfect.
Okay, I think that's all the time that we have for today's stream. I'd like to thank you, Golden Zan, again for coming on and asking all the questions for me today. You did an amazing job, and we love to hear your feedback, as always. Thank you, Dennis, for joining me on the couch here. Dennis won't be with us next week, unfortunately. So instead of our regular program stream, we're going to be having we're calling it the Living versus the Living tournament. We'll have a Super Smash Brothers tournament next week, February 13th. At 3:30 p.m. is when we'll be hosting that, so you can catch the development team duking it out in Super Smash Brothers with myself. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you all next week for Apocalypse Studios' next stream. Take care and fight the living.
Thanks, everyone.